IVM.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project.
We have as our guest today Mrs. Anjali Raina, Executive Director at Harvard Business School. In this episode, we deep dive into the book Play to Win by Larry Wilson.
In the second half, we also discuss How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen, The Opposable Mind by Roger Martin, Imagining India by Nandan Nilekani, and Trust by Tarun Khanna.
Our conversation with Mrs. Raina reflects on timeless concepts, narrating how life is often played to not lose rather than to win, the paradox of meaningful relationships, integrative thinking, reimagining India, and building trust in existing business structures.
Rethinking success. Being successful has traditionally been the payoff of any game. Having the trappings of success is how you know you've won. And yet, as most of us know, simply being successful, even though we obsess over it, is only one dimension of what it is to be a human being. A number of years ago, I held a dinner for some of the top-performing second-year salespeople in the insurance industry. After an hour or so of shop talk, I asked how they were feeling about their success. Silence. Then they all looked around the room at each other, and a few of the more outspoken began to speak. They were terrified, they said. The more successful they became, the more pressure they felt to be even more successful. One of the salespeople said she felt like she was chasing a rabbit. No matter how fast she ran, the rabbit kept getting farther and farther away. It made her feel desperate. People claim they want to be successful because they'll have financial security and be able to buy the things they want. If you ask them, why do you want financial security? What will you get if you buy the things you want? They'll probably answer, I'll feel the way I want to feel. I'll feel happier, more emotionally secure, and so on. What we really want, it seems, is happiness or emotional security. What we believe is that we can get that feeling by becoming successful. And advertising reinforces this belief every waking minute of our lives. It is as if someone sat us down at the beginning of our careers and whispered the magic word success. What we thought we heard was that life was about being successful above all else. If we were successful, we would get the feelings we were after: fulfillment, happiness, and emotional security. But we misunderstood. Success is fine, making money is usually a good thing. But the truth that we all discover sooner or later, that there is no direct and automatic correlation between success and the feelings of joy, happiness, and emotional security that we crave. Dr. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and author of Man's Search for Meaning, who spent 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, explained this. He drew a line on the blackboard that he labeled failure on one end and success on the other. He said that much of our lives are spent working hard to be successful. Success is primarily defined by external measures: how much money you make, your rank in the company, and the respect accorded you by your peers. Being successful seemingly always involves being measured against others. Frankl believed that there is a wholly separate dimension, commonly left out of our thinking and planning, one that is critical to the health and happiness of human beings. He drew a vertical line across the horizontal line and called it the depression fulfillment line. Fulfillment is the deeply felt sense that your life is full, whole, complete, that you have expanded to fill up your potential. Fulfillment is knowing that if you died tomorrow, your life would have meant something, that it was going in the right direction and you were making a difference. Fulfillment, unlike success, is largely defined by internal measures, by how we feel about what we're doing or have done.
Thank you, Anjali Raina. That was an excerpt from the book Play to Win by Larry Wilson. Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project. I am your co-host Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I'm hosting the podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Racheta Sharma.
Hi guys, my name is Racheta and I'm an ex-banker who has left my banking profession to follow my passion and run libraries across the world. The Open Library Project is a non-fiction book library service offered to businesses on a subscription basis. We're trying to move away from the run-of-the-mill library concept and setting up rotational and locational curated libraries at co-working spaces, corporates, and business incubators. The idea here is to create value, build a knowledge community, and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Anjali Raina, Executive Director of Harvard Business School. Welcome to the show, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting me.
That excerpt was truly amazing, and we'll get into more details. I actually wanted to start with asking you about so the book starts with an example, which is on the story of cattle and how they do not cross over a painted cattle guard. So can you tell us how this theme is related to the book, or, what inspires you and influences you from this?
So the cattle that Larry Wilson refers to in this book, Play to Win, grazed on ranges in West Texas. The ranges were so large that the cattle owners drove in pickup trucks to cover the range, and the cattle were fenced into different fields. It was uneconomical to build gates across the roads between one field and the other.
Right.
So the cattle owners would dig a ditch across the road and put metal bars across the ditch. The cattle couldn't cross the metal bars and stayed fenced into the field. After some time, the cattle owners stopped digging ditches. They just painted stripes on the ground, and the painted stripes were enough to prevent the cattle from crossing to a different, greener field. Until one day, a smart cow examined the painted stripes, discovered it was just paint, and led the herd to lush green grass on the other side of the fence. So this tale is maybe just a tale, but it illustrates that often the barriers that prevent us from moving ahead are imaginary, just made up.
Right.
If we can stop, examine the made-up barrier, the imaginary barrier, and challenge it, we can choose to cross over into a world of lush green possibility. And this is actually the core concept of the book, Play to Win, by Larry and Hersh Wilson. This book helped me to understand that in the game of life, to be both successful and fulfilled, we need to play to win. The fear of failure, the fear of looking bad often makes us play the game of not to lose.
Right.
So to avoid risk, we only do what we are good at, where we know we will succeed. The pity is that our family, our friends, our colleagues often reinforce this thinking. And so we don't take the risks that would enable us to challenge ourselves, build our skills, and grow into our full potential. We remain limited. This game of play not to lose may lead to success in material terms and achievement. I've always been an achievement-oriented person, and I know that hard work, persistent commitment enables you to pass exams, get sales results, achieve success in the way it's generally measured in the world.
Right.
But many people I know who play this game are successful, but they aren't happy and fulfilled. They're divorced, they don't have good relationships, they're estranged from their parents, they're estranged from their children. And this book explains that there's one dimension which is failure and success, but there's also another dimension which is fulfillment and depression.
Right.
And
So it has to be a balance of all of those.
actually, if you want to play in the quadrant of fulfillment and success, then you lead an abundant life, a full life.
Right.
So that's the only quadrant to play in.
Right.
But for that, you have to pursue those efforts which lead to success, and also those efforts which lead to fulfillment. And those efforts which lead to fulfillment are not hard work, persistence, and commitment, which is the success quadrant.
Right.
But fulfillment is really about finding work that's meaningful, that's
Right.
creative, that that really engages you. It's also about having loving and meaningful relationships.
Right.
Right.
And it's also about thinking about the legacy that you want to leave behind and what is going to outlast you.
Yeah.
And-
It's also very important to think out of the box, because if you really want to grow personally and professionally, there are times that you have to take risks and do things which are not in your comfort zone. And like the book, suggests that if you're going to keep doing things that you're good at, you're never going to know if you can or cannot do, something beyond that zone. So, yeah, it's truly an inspiring thought that you should be able to balance your fulfillment and success quadrants. Yeah.
And to actually be able to do that, what was really interesting for me was the whole concept of the fact that you can think it.
Yeah.
Right.
So the concept of thinking and the idea that thought is so important,
Yeah.
that it can lead you to lead this meaningful life, that you can thrive, you can be happy, and you can be successful. was fascinating for me. That's really what inspired me to go deep into this. So I talked about the imaginary cattle line. So, some stuff is just imagined, that I'm not good at speaking, I'm not good at writing, I'm not good at mathematics. And, it might be somebody who tells you that that's an imaginary thing. I always thought I wasn't good at maths until somebody in the bank where I was working pointed out to me that I was great at maths.
Yeah.
I was able to look at a line of figures and cast it. So sometimes it takes an outsider to tell you that you're imagining
that
this.
you're good at something that you may have perceived that you're not
That
good
you're
at.
not. So that you're imagining a barrier in your own heart, which you actually... And so
because of the fear of failure, you don't want to not be good at something, so you rather not
that
do
might hold you back. Other times you make stuff up.
it. Yeah.
I live in Alibag, and there are lots of snakes there.
Right.
And, it amazes me that when I see a snake, I sort of run screaming away from the snake.
Yeah.
But when the snake catcher comes, he or she will look at that snake and say, oh, this is just an ordinary grass snake. Don't be worried. Leave it there.
Right.
Another guy will come and say, this is a rat snake. We should leave these rat snakes around because they eat the rats.
Yeah.
And then another guy, the same snake catcher may say, oh no, this is a cobra or this is a crate and this is very poisonous. But they don't kill it. They pick it up and release it into the jungle so that it survives, because they say even that has a place in the ecosystem.
Right. Yeah.
And the snake catcher's approach and my approach are different, only because our experience of snakes, our knowledge of snakes is different. So I make stuff up. Every snake is poisonous. This is going to bite me. This is going to do this. And making stuff up is one of the ways in which people think, which is self-destructive.
Okay.
Right.
So we need to be able to understand and identify when we're making stuff up. And that means when we hear these words, oh my God, this snake is going to bite me, we should be frightened of snakes. When we hear that word should, we know we're making stuff up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we should stop. And we should challenge our thinking. So this is the interpretation.
Right.
What people have told us, what we've read, what we've heard, these preconceived notions or interpretations of an event or an animal or a human being.
Yeah.
Somebody doesn't say good morning to you. Our preconceived notion is that person's so rude.
Right.
Or if that's your boss, you say, oh my God, the person doesn't like me anymore. The person's not liking my job. I didn't do that project. That person is going to sack me. I'm going to lose my job. Then I'm going to be out on the road. So from this interpretation of what should be and how somebody should behave, we also start catastrophizing, which is another way of thinking, which we should avoid.
Right.
So imaginary stuff, making stuff up, and then catastrophizing, making things out to be much worse than they actually are, is also what happens. And if we can break these, if we understand and recognizes these patterns of thinking, and we can stop, we can challenge these, and we can choose how to interpret this, we can manage our emotions and our feelings much better. And that leads to the game of play to win rather than play to lose.
Okay.
Because instead of being, thinking, oh my God, this is going to happen, this is something, this is risky, this is not good, this is not going to be good for me, we realize that that's not actually the way to think. This is just something that happened. It doesn't really, the person may not have said good morning because the person was thinking about something else.
Yeah.
May not have seen me. And so next time we will say good morning
Right.
than not. If we don't, that person next time may think we're rude.
Yeah.
And a perfectly good relationship may actually go south.
Right.
So that's how an example of unrealistic thinking can
do
actually
like real world harm.
ruin things.
Right.
Ruin things.
So, ma'am, tell us, who would you recommend this book to? And do you often reread the book? Do you think that it gives you a different perspective at different times in your life?
I would recommend this book to everybody because it is really about, it's not necessarily only for a professional or a working person. It actually applies to any living human being because it teaches you how to lead an abundant and happy life and a successful life, whatever you do. And it teaches you the foundation of thinking and how to talk to yourself in a way that is positive and encouraging.
Right.
I love this book. And you can see by the fact that it is marked with so many post-its and lines and colors that it's a book that I read and reread. Because unfortunately, falling into unproductive ways of thinking is a human trait.
Right.
We are meaning-making machines. People call us human beings. We're actually meaning-making machines. So we make meaning out of nothing. We make stories. We make up stories. So
we should make positive meaning is something we should focus on. I mean,
we should just focus on the reality.
On the reality. Okay.
There's traffic.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the world is against you.
Right.
It doesn't mean that if you reach late, your boss is going to sack you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, the girl whom you're having a date with is going to run away and not marry you.
Yeah.
It's just, there's traffic.
Right.
That's it. So that ability to just look at it, take a deep breath and focus on something else, focus on something more productive. That's what thinking is about. So that's a very minor example, but you can use it in much more positive ways to actually make your work and your life better.
Right.
And that's why this book is so fascinating, because I've given you a very superficial level. But if you read about how you should look at results, how you should look at what to choose, what are the productive ways of thinking, which is what the book goes into, and talks about all the strategies for playing to win, your life can become much happier. For example, I'm now 60 years old. I just celebrated my 60th birthday. And unfortunately, I started thinking that, nobody cares for me and nobody's making a fuss of my birthday, etc. And actually they were. My sister flew in from Delhi. My daughter had made all sorts of special arrangements. My colleagues had thrown the most fabulous party. And so all that negative, miserable thinking that I'm unloved and uncared for was making stuff up.
Right.
Yeah.
And then yesterday, my daughter actually at dinner reminded me that even last year we had a wonderful birthday.
Okay.
And, we had a great celebration. We had gone to the A.R. Rahman concert and we had gone to Dome and we'd had a lunch with the family and so on. And I thought to myself that, I need to go back and read this book again because I am making stuff up.
So it's a lot about streamlining your thoughts.
And
recognizing realities.
Recognizing reality and recognizing that you're loved and loving people and you're surrounded by these people, whereas it was just making me unhappy for nothing. That makes you unproductive. You then focus your energies on unproductive things. You don't focus on your work. You don't focus on building stuff. So that's how it pulls you down. That's why controlling your emotions through thinking is what this book is about.
Great. On that note, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back after this.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please make sure that you do. We're IVM Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we did this last week and we had a pretty good response and we'd like to keep it going. So if you are listening to an IVM podcast, take a screenshot of that, put it on your Instagram story and tag us with it. And what we'll do is we'll repost it on our story so that people get a look at what you're listening to. And people who come onto our stories will get an idea of what kind of things people are listening to. Leave us a comment too, just don't tag us. Last week, we launched 2 new shows. We launched our first Marathi podcast. It's called Golgappa, hosted by a regular on our network, Trupti Khamkar. Actress Shivani Tangsale is the first guest of the show, and she talks about baking, her Everest climbing experience, and her love for theater. And we also launched the Filter Coffee podcast, hosted by Karthik Nagarajan. On the first episode, Karthik talks to film editor Nishant Radhakrishnan about focus group screenings, OTT platforms, and the future of the Indian film industry. On The Seen and the Unseen, in part 1 of a 2-part conversation, Amit Verma talks to historian and author Ramchandra Guha about Mahatma Gandhi's early years and his life in South Africa. On the Hindi podcast Cinemaya, writer-director Tanuja Chandra joins Swati Bakshi to discuss how she started her career with TV and the joys of making thrillers. On Paisa Vaisa, we have a 1-hour exclusive episode with Morgan Housel. He's a partner at the Collaborative Fund and a former columnist on Wall Street. He does a deep dive into the psychology of money. That's a really great episode. And with that, let's continue on with your shows.
Welcome back to the show. We are still with Anjali Raina from Harvard Business School. So the next book we are going to be discussing on the podcast is How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. So ma'am, tell us about this book. This is again similar to
what we were
speaking about Play to Win. And this book I think talks about how to measure the different metrics of your life as compared to the metrics of your business. So what stood out for you? What did you like about this book?
You're absolutely right. It was, when you asked me about my 5 favorite books, I realized that there's a theme which runs through it.
Yeah.
And this book by Professor Clayton Christensen on How Will You Measure Your Life actually talks about the quadrant of fulfillment.
Okay.
What's fascinating for me, however, as a business person, as a professional, as somebody who studies business, researches business, is that Clayton has applied the principles of business success to the principles of life.
Okay.
And that analogy and that implication, that parallel is just fascinating to me. So Clayton talks about the fact that businesses which succeed and which outlive their founders are businesses which have a sense of purpose.
Okay.
There's some businesses which, are very created very clearly to make the founder rich.
Right.
Yeah.
And those businesses normally don't outlive the founder, may not even live as long as the founder, may die before the founder.
Right.
But businesses which have survived for many years, like Arvind Eye Hospital, for example, which is an eye hospital in India, which has got the largest number of eye surgeries that people have seen. Hospitals like that have a sense of purpose.
Right.
Companies like that have a sense of purpose. And when they have that sense of purpose and meaning, they tend to outlive their founders. So what Clayton says is, just like companies need to have a purpose, even you, as a human being, need to define your purpose.
Okay.
Now, of course, that goes back to thinking, because defining purpose, understanding the purpose of your life doesn't just come to you. It takes deep reflection, it takes deep thinking, it takes time, it takes effort.
Yeah.
And so to a certain extent, it's related to the book on Play to Win. It's also related to the quadrant of fulfillment, that what makes you lead a fulfilled life.
Yeah.
Clayton goes on to talk about the fact that it's not just purpose. You also need to have commitment, and you need to have metrics.
Right.
How will you measure it?
Right.
That's also an interesting concept.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, he talks about the paradox, which I spoke to you about earlier as well. And I absolutely, love that thought process that, the most important relationships in our life are the ones which require most attention and dedication. But we somehow always assume that they don't, because, there is somebody to support us or somebody to always understand. But I guess if we see the long-term purpose of that, or the fulfillment that relationship would give us, we'd be probably a little more careful or a little more attentive, I would say.
Yes, and Rachita, you hit on something very important, because what happens in life is that we tend to chase short-term wins. Mm-hmm. And as an achievement-oriented person, I know that if I study hard for an exam and I get good results, I'll get to see straight away. If I don't get the good results, I know that maybe I have to go back and study in a different way or learn something else, and then I'll get good results. Right. But I can measure it immediately. If I'm at work, I can see that if I put in hard work and I am dedicated and committed, I'll probably, get better jobs, get a promotion, get a higher salary, and so on. But if I spend an hour or two with my mom, or with my husband, or with my daughter or my sister, if every evening, the results of that may not actually show for many years.
Right. Yeah.
And even if I spend that time with my daughter every day when she's small, I mean, it's still no guarantee that the relationship at the end of it will be a good one.
Right.
So because of that uncertainty, because of that lack of measurability, people tend to focus on the short-term wins. You can't blame them, because that is something you can see. It's tangible.
It's easily measurable also.
It's easily measurable.
Yeah,
so we need to spend time with we need to treat these relationships also as a job.
Right.
Yeah.
And we need to invest that time in them.
Thought by the author. I actually really like it. And now that, we've been talking about thinking so much, there's also a book that you recommended, The Opposable Mind, which talks about integrative thinking. So, could you give us more detail about, what the book is about and what is the lesson that we can derive from the book?
So this book is also fascinating. It's by Roger Martin.
Yeah.
And The Opposable Mind is actually about winning through integrative thinking.
Okay.
So it's defined, this whole concept of integrative thinking is defined as the concept of being able to hold two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time. So, and then you create a synthesis that contains elements of both, but actually improves on each.
Okay.
So it's a difficult concept in a way, and maybe I'm not explaining it very well, but another way of thinking about it is constructive thinking. We're used to in school thinking about a debate where you tear somebody else down.
Right.
So that's called critical thinking. We're also used to advertising where, somebody blue skies and creates an advertisement out of nothing, which is creative.
Right.
But the ability to actually bring together what you're saying and to build on it. And you may be arguing that we should be increasing sales, and you may be arguing that we should be cutting costs.
Right.
But the person who can bring together increasing sales and cutting costs, which are two opposing thoughts, because how can you cut costs if you're increasing sales? You need to have more people, etc. But somebody who can bring these two opposing thoughts together and craft a solution out of it, that person has integrative thinking.
Okay.
Great.
It's difficult.
That's a very interesting concept. It seems really difficult to execute also. I mean, to hold opposing thoughts, it's basically coming to a consensus with opposing thoughts, I run a few businesses, so I know how difficult increasing sales and cutting costs at the same time is. So
absolutely. But the person who can do it is likely to have a successful business.
Right.
And that's why I love the Harvard Business School and the classroom pedagogy. Because in our classrooms, this is exactly what is taught.
Okay.
The professor, first to be able to do this, you need to be able to hear each other.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, that'll be a very important factor to be able to be open to even listening to someone else's opposing thought. Yeah.
To be able to, and
accept
you need to
the critical argument that's been presented by the opposing
You need to
person.
be able to build on that idea.
Right.
So first I need to be able to hear that you're saying increase sales.
Yeah.
Satyajit needs to hear Racheta saying that we need to cut costs.
Yeah.
And then you need to hear somebody else saying we can do both.
Right.
Yeah.
And this involves not cutting down Satyajit's point or not cutting down Racheta's point, but actually listening to it and then building on it. And that's what happens in the classroom. Our Harvard Business School students do almost 400 case studies
Wow.
where they have these type of dilemmas.
Right.
They have these type of arguments about which is the right choice to take.
Okay.
So right in the beginning, remember in the first book I said we need to do stop, challenge, choose.
Yes.
So here you're doing a stop, challenge. Okay, so this guy's saying increase costs or decrease costs, or this guy's saying increase sales or decrease sales. So let's think about it. Let's challenge it. Do we really need to? But we also need to choose
Yeah.
whether we should be increasing sales or decreasing sales,
Right.
and why we need to do it. So I'm not allowed to criticize your thought
Okay.
unless I also give the reason why, and I'm able to give another alternative.
Okay.
So I can't just say, no, we can't increase sales.
Yeah,
I have to give an
has to be a
alternative.
better
There has to
solution.
be something. That idea of being able to build on the other person's idea
Okay.
rather than just cutting it down
Yeah.
is a very important skill, which is built in the classroom by the pedagogical method of the case discussion, where the professor facilitates this. And that's why you tend to see that these students are so good, because this concept of integrative thinking is built into the pedagogy.
That's
Wow.
beautiful.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. I already want to go to Harvard.
Or read the book,
Definitely.
Yes, most definitely.
The next book we're moving on to is Imagining India by Nandan Nilekani. He's of course the co-founder of Infosys, and he's also the father of the UIDAI,
Yeah.
the Aadhaar card system. So, ma'am, what about this book would you suggest to our reader? Why would someone read this? Read this book?
Of course, I'm a great admirer of Nandan Nilekani's, and I've read this book from cover to cover. And that's because this book actually aligns with my life's purpose.
Okay.
Okay.
In the sense that I'm very patriotic. I love my country. India means a lot to me. And if I can do something to help our country transform, our citizens do better, our Indians gain a meaningful life and reach their potential, it would make me very happy. And this book, actually, of Nandan's, showed me in a very concise way. It's not a small book. It's quite a fat book. It's got something like 500 pages, I think.
Okay.
A little over 500 pages. But in a very concise way, it actually takes all the big challenges that are confronting our country and thinks about the possibilities. You know, you have lots of books which talk about what are the problems.
Yeah.
But what are the accelerators? What are the
Right.
possibilities? What are the solutions?
Yeah.
This book talks about that.
Okay.
Nandan analyzes the issues, like in the chapter on education. He talks about the issues in our education system and why they occurred. He doesn't just say this is bad, etc., etc.
Right.
Yeah.
He talks about the evolution and how it came to be like this.
Okay.
And then he talks about what it could be.
Okay. What could be possible solutions to the?
And
Or
what
even opportunities. right?
what the education system could look like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not necessarily a solution, but he's saying this is what it could look like. This is the reason why it's like this. And if it was like this is how
Okay.
our country could transform. I'm just giving it to you in a pot shot. The book is very deep, very well researched, and I'm giving you a very small example. But he's covered, many chapters, including schools, including cities, including jobs, including livelihoods, including institutions. So he's actually taken our country from end to end, and he's looked at it in a very deep, analytical way.
Okay.
And I saw this as a beacon of hope.
Okay.
And it inspired me to actually look at many, many of these things. In my job, I am a researcher. We write business school case studies, and we have the opportunity actually to examine many of the issues that Nandan identified. And we have the opportunity to look at business models that have solved some of these.
Okay. Wow.
So
wow.
this book actually helped me to understand which are the areas we could focus on. And you mentioned UIDAI. We actually did a case study on Aadhaar.
Okay.
Nandan also, is the architect of the Aadhaar, which means foundation.
Yeah.
And that's given an identity to 1.2 billion Indians.
Right.
And when it came out, we wrote the case study on it, and there was a lot of questioning as to whether this would succeed. So it's been fascinating for my colleague Rachna Chawla and my professor Tarun Khanna and me to see how actually the system has moved on. It has become something that everybody has got an ID now, and it's being used in many ways which people had not imagined. It's also very different from anywhere in the world, because everywhere in the world these type of systems are owned by the individual, private practice, like Google or Apple or something. Or in China, it's owned by the state. Right. But here we have this, which has been created by the state, but private practitioners can create an application on top of that. That gives us hope for our country. Right. So this is an example of how Nandan has inspired me to think differently about the challenges in our country. And that's why I find his book so fascinating. Even now, when I want to go back and understand a problem, I go back and read the chapter on the analysis of how we evolved here.
Okay. It sounds very interesting for anyone doing business in our country. We can probably look at so many possibilities that it goes into the history, well-researched history, so that it talks to the cause of the problem and that what may be the possible solution.
It's again the same thought, right? That you don't try and you'll never know. So,
right, yes. Right.
All the books are really well intertwined.
Yeah. So the last book we are moving on to is Trust by Professor Tarun Khanna, who's also a professor at Harvard Business School. So reading this book was absolutely fascinating for me, because while reading it as an Indian entrepreneur, I recognized that what he talks about is the differences in a developed world and a developing world. So I definitely saw a lot of the missing institutions that are there, and I felt them too. So ma'am, what about this book stood out for you?
So, I'm a great admirer of Professor Tarun Khanna's, and I love all his books. This one actually resonated with me because it's extremely readable.
Yeah.
It's, it has got almost 160 pages, but the chapters just flow.
Yeah.
And it is written in a very fabulous narrative style with stories about successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs from around the world. So, for example, Professor Khanna has spoken about Amul, the dairy here, but he's also spoken about a Chinese dairy. And he's contrasted the two stories and how one has succeeded, what has made one do so well, the different business model that somebody else followed. So the application of global perspective, global stories, global learnings, and the illustration of Indian stories and Indian perspectives, the juxtaposition of this, I find fascinating, because it shows you that there's no right way, one way, only one way to get somewhere. There can be different ways in which you can reach a successful conclusion.
And this would actually be really helpful for entrepreneurs, because I feel that a lot of times we feel a certain thing is working out in another country, so it may even work in India, but maybe you just don't have the market for it, or what is doing really well there would not be doing as well here.
Yeah, absolutely. And another reason why this is so useful for entrepreneurs in India especially is because Professor Khanna talks about the fact that you need to have entrepreneurs who succeed in emerging markets actually need to create a web of trust. Because there's so many things that are missing in our country.
Yeah.
Right.
In emerging markets, not just in India, but in all emerging markets. There's so many things that are missing that when you create a web of trust, you are able to actually get things done in a way which compensates for the lack of other stuff, for the lack of the missing institution. Like you mentioned, that the legal system is sometimes slow in an emerging market.
Yeah.
So if you trust the person you're dealing with, and that person trusts you, then maybe the legal paperwork is not that important because of that web of trust that has been created. And this also goes back to the concept of building relationships, thinking about it, and investing in working on people-to-people interactions and not just transactional interactions. So that, in a way, this book, with its concept of trust and the importance of trust in emerging markets for entrepreneurs, helps us to understand that. This book also gives me hope, because we are so short of jobs in India that the only way we can actually provide livelihoods is by creating many, many entrepreneurs. because entrepreneurs actually generate jobs.
Right.
And this book gives me hope because it shows that investing in building trust doesn't really require capital. It requires only human capital. It doesn't require financial capital.
Right.
So one can actually, if one invests in that, entrepreneurs can be successful.
Yeah,
even
that's
in emerging
something
markets.
which is in our control. The capital may not, but our human relations definitely are. So.
Definitely.
So, ma'am, could you also recommend some other books written by Indian Harvard professors which would, maybe talk about a different perspective in business?
So there are there are three professors whose books I really adore. One is Bharat Anand, who's written a book called The Content Trap.
Okay.
Then there's Professor Sunil Gupta, who's written a book on driving digital strategy. And then, of course, my favorite, Ranjay Gulati, whose book is on reorganizing for resilience.
All right.
These three books are useful reading for any entrepreneur.
Great.
Yeah, and very relevant, I guess, in our times now.
Yeah. On that note, we're going to end the podcast with a short poem from Anjali ma'am.
Actually, this is not a poem by me, but it's a poem which is one
Read
of my
by you,
favorites. Yes, it's a poem by a gentleman called Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right.
Oh,
And the name of the poem is To Have Succeeded.
Okay.
So you can see that it resonates with the theme of the other books.
Yeah, definitely.
And Ralph Waldo Emerson says, to laugh often and love much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the approbation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to give oneself, to leave the world a little better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or redeemed social condition, to have played and laughed with enthusiasm and sung with exaltation, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded.
This is the poem which we have put up in office also, by the way. So, I'm very excited that you read it.
Thank you, Anjali Raina, for being with us today and sharing your insights on these books. We look forward to having you on the show again. And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library Project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events. And stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcasts on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts.
You say jogging, and I'm telling you a story about a man who dated 3 sisters. You say boss, Kurla, and it's about a guy who went out to a party where they were selling beef. This is Anand Sivkumaran, aka The Croc. My show, The Croc's Tales. You give me a word, I'll tell you a story. Words aapke, kahani aapke liye. Do tune in on Monday and Thursday on the IVM website, app, and anywhere you get your podcast from.
Did you know that Parsis in Mumbai, instead of being left at the Tower of Silence after they die, are now cremated? And why? Because a cow fell sick in the early 1990s. Did you know that the smog in Delhi is caused by something that farmers in Punjab do and that there's no way to stop them? Did you know that there wasn't one gas tragedy in Bhopal but 3? One of them was seen but 2 were unseen. Did you know that many well-intentioned government policies hurt the people they're supposed to help? Why was demonetization a bad idea? How should GST have been implemented? Why are all our politicians so corrupt when not all of them are bad people? I'm Amit Verma, and in my weekly podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, I take a shot at answering all these questions and many more. I aim to go beyond the seen and show you the unseen effects of public policy and private action. I speak to experts on economics, political philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, and constitutional law so that the insights can blow not only my mind, but also yours. The Seen and the Unseen releases every Monday. So do check out the archives and follow the show at seenunseen.in. You can also subscribe to The Seen and the Unseen on whatever podcast app you happen to prefer.